Hi, Bob. How are we doing?
Well, pretty good. Glad to be back.
Well, it's always good to have you. I was reading a fascinating interview in the Wall Street Journal, actually an editorial page article by Mr. Zuckerman. Of course, you can't tell the players without a program, and of course, Mr. Zuckerman just happens to be the editor-in-chief of U.S. News and World Report, but he is certainly one of the insiders, or Brotherhood of Darkness. He's a member of the Trilateral Commission, certainly of the Council on Foreign Relations. This whole group, a little group of perhaps a few dozen people who run the world. And he's talking about the terrible problems with unemployment here. And it's really a very good article, the first half of it anyway, where he talks about the fact that we've got about 15 million people unemployed. I think that's certainly very restricted. I think we have probably many more than that, but he paints a very dark picture of the unemployment problem. But the solution is we need jobs, and we need good, productive jobs, and that's why we should rebuild the infrastructure of our country with borrowed money. We should build bridges and roads and all the things in infrastructure, but if you're going to have a prosperous society, you've got to be producing things, not rebuilding the infrastructure. And then, of course, he wants to bring in a lot more of the foreign workers on H-1N1 visas here and take jobs away from Americans. But he doesn't want it to be certainly just keep the jobs for ourselves. He wants us to provide jobs from people from other countries, because that's how we're going to get prosperity in America. And, of course, it's the old globalist theme. He understands what's going on. He talks about wanting jobs from the American people, but he's not going to produce any prosperity because we're not producing. We used to have a third of our jobs from manufacturing. Now it's down to a tenth. We used to be the largest manufacturer in the world. Now, of course, we were going from 20 to 11% of the manufacturing. And Mr. Zuckerman's part and parcel of this whole process of transferring America's wealth and jobs overseas, but boy, he sure puts up a good picture of being a patriotic American. What are your thoughts on these ideas of we're going to get prosperous by rebuilding our infrastructure and bringing in more H-1B1 workers from other countries so they can take jobs from Americans?
Well, he needs more slave labor.
Right, of course, we're going to send our jobs overseas with the slave labor, and where are the jobs going to come from? More government jobs, and that is no solution to the problem. So what's your take on what's going on? Certainly, they tell us that, my goodness, it was great in December. We only lost, 65,000 jobs. But if you look at the real figures, even according to Mr. Zuckerman, why, of course, the real figure was 661,000 jobs, new jobs. I should say old jobs were lost. So we don't seem to be getting much better, are we, Bob?
No, we're continuing to slip into the hole, so to speak. And your figures are right. And Mr. Zuckerman's wrong. There's probably 25 to, or more, maybe as many as 30 million people unemployed.
Right.
And
well, I think he doesn't want people to know how bad things really are. And his solutions aren't solutions. They're just going to prolong the problem, which he and his confreres created. We'll go right ahead, Bob.
You know, this is atypical of the CFR Trilat Bilderberger types. And these are the people who have knowingly destroyed the country, destroyed the manufacturing and commercial infrastructure, and really reduced most jobs that people lost down perhaps 50 to 70% less wages than they were making before. You know, if people stop and think for a minute, you know, the $31 an hour jobs are now $8 to $15 an hour. And, of course, bringing in H-1B1 people is ridiculous because we got so many unemployed people now. And, you know, how can there ever be recovery when most all of the jobs are being created by government. And so the idea is everybody works for the government, and then they can control everybody. And then they bring the slaves in from other countries, and they control them as well. And I don't know what they're going to do with everybody. They'll probably execute in one way or another half the population of useless eaters, so to speak. And these are their goals. This is what they're after. And the American people don't have a clue. And fortunately, some people are thinking outside the box and they're listening to programs like this. So they're finding out what these people have done in reality, where it's headed, and what they can do for themselves to protect themselves against what is going on. And it's not an easy process. People are made to change, and the changes all have been not for the good. And the real estate situation is deteriorating, both residential and commercial, so there'll be no recovery there. And our country is bankrupt, like many others. We are looking at thousands of businesses that are on the edge or in bankruptcy, such as our largest banks and brokerage firms and insurance companies, transnational conglomerates like General Electric. And we saw what happened to Chrysler and General Motors. And it just goes on and on.
Hold that thought, Bob. We'll be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Of course, Bob is reiterating the fact that massive unemployment, certainly maybe as much as 25 million, even 30 million people unemployed. Certainly the figure that Mr. Zuckerman uses of 15 million unemployed, well, he doesn't get into the underemployed. You have the unemployed, then you have the underemployed. These are the people who are certainly not getting anywhere near the job amount of money they did before, and those who simply give up work looking for jobs. They've been looking for a year, a couple of years, and they just can't find anything. So it's easier to live on welfare, unemployment, than go out and actually look for jobs. And that's really what's increasingly happening. As long as you have this massive safety net, why, of course, people are not going to extend themselves and take a very low-paying or menial job. And, of course, that's why, of course, we are allowing the illegal aliens to stay, because they'll work for literally nothing or very, very little. In fact, right now, the story is that many of the people in Mexico are having to send money to their relatives in America so they can subsist here. Well, then, of course, the housing situation is not getting any better. The figure, I've heard something like 18 million empty homes. Is that out of line, Bob? What do you think?
No, because the problem is that the lenders are not admitting to the total amount of dwellings that they have for sale. We saw supposedly the inventory supply for residential drop from 11 to 8 million. These are the homes that were sold to people who were subprime and ultra boroughs. And but if you look at the phantom, we'll call it, inventory, you're right back up to 11 million, maybe even more. We just don't know. And so what's going to happen is eventually they'll all come in the market, so there's not going to be any recovery in real estate. This little blip you're seeing now is very, very short term, and it's going to get worse again.
Well, what amazes me is all the builders are out there taking out permits and actually under construction new homes. When we have so many homes on the market, what in heaven's name are they thinking about building new homes when they can't sell all the homes that there are now? What are they thinking about putting in new commercial developments when suddenly so many of the commercial developments are empty now, they can't rent them, and they're all going to go back to the banks, and their value's going to plummet. I mean, it's almost as if people honestly believe that what they're told, oh, well, we're coming out of the recession, everything's going to be fine. But the truth of the matter is, we're not. Would that be a fair appraisal?